In 1968, hundreds of students of Columbia University had stormed the university's Hamilton Hall, protesting against the Vietnam War. More than 700 were arrested. In 1985, students occupied the Hamilton Hall, demanding the university to stop doing business in South Africa during apartheid. This year, students laid siege on the historic Hamilton Hall as part of their anti-Israel protests, an attempt to make the hall a symbol of student activism once again. Demonstrations have spread across top Ivy League colleges in the United States. The NYU, Berkeley, Yale, Columbia, MIT, they're all witness to the chaos that has descended upon campuses following the Israel-Hamas war. This came after Columbia University President Nemat Shafiq said that negotiations between students and authorities had failed and asked protesters to leave the camps they have set up. Now, even as more than 1,000 students have been arrested so far, the crackdown at Columbia and other universities has been criticized by United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk, who said that he is troubled by the heavy-handed action and that legitimate exercises of the freedom of expression cannot be conflated. So here's the question that I'm asking on Nation tonight. Are top American universities falling apart, or should our leaders be listening to the young and stop the war? To talk more on this, I'm joined by Rashmi Samant. She's a former student and union president of the Oxford University, also a human rights activist. I'm also joined by Abhishek Sudhir from in the studio. He's a lawyer. Rashmi, let me start with you first. What do you make of these protests, Rashmi, really? You know, you've been there at the Oxford University, and these Ivy League colleges are seeing protests for months now. It has only escalated this time around. But what do you make of them? Some say that these are genuine protests, these are genuine demands that the students, the youngsters are making. Some say that this is beyond student activism. This is a lot to do with politics, and there are forces beyond students, beyond the youngsters who are behind these protests.
Well, Shreya, firstly, I think all campuses are in a way or not, places where there's student activism. But the timing of this particular uprising, I think that is what is concerning, because the protests are happening now much after the conflict, the most recent conflict between Israel and Palestine has started. So I think the timing is a little off, and the timing gives some sense of, artificial prompting from outside sources and not something that organically came from within the campus. This is what's been, discussed among the student communities. Other than that, what I find absolutely concerning is the fact that the students are being arrested. Even professors who are, part of these protests are being, pounded to the concrete floor on the streets of their very own campuses, and then they're being arrested. And it's a travesty that the United States ranks much higher in terms of democracy index, where it has very little, whilst it has very little regard for free speech of its own students and faculty. So I think that kind of a comparison, if you draw with respect to India, then you can clearly see the hypocrisy in the way in which countries in the global south are treated with respect to their freedom of speech and democracy and all other indices as compared to the West. So I think there are lots of troubling.
The United States, of course, has a lot to answer, as well as the Biden administration. But Rashmi, let me take this across to Abhishek Sudhir as well. Abhishek Sudhir, you know, we all have the right to express our feelings, our opinions. And students, rightly so, are doing that. But look at the visuals that are coming in, the scenes that are coming in out of US universities and colleges. Is that the way to put your point across, holding ransom the universities, making people hostages when you're occupying the Hamilton Hall? Does that, and is that how it works?
Well, Shreya, we taught the world civil disobedience, right? It was Mahatma Gandhi who came up with civil disobedience. Mr. Gandhi said that civil disobedience is the inherent right of every citizen. And he said civil disobedience should never lead to violence. It's criminal disobedience that can lead to anarchy. Yes, there is a fine line between civil disobedience and criminal disobedience. But you just referred to in your opening remarks about the 1968 anti-war protests, where the same hall was occupied. Why they were protesting the Vietnam War. In 85, the same hall was occupied. What were they protesting? Apartheid. Today, right? Do we have apartheid in South Africa? No. The Vietnam War ended because of the pressure students put on the US administration, on multiple administrations, right? You had 3 different presidents who oversaw the Vietnam War, but finally they had to succumb to that pressure. Look, Shreya, campuses are hotbeds of activity, of activism, yes, but campuses where students go to learn. I would argue that this is part of the learning process. These very students in 20, 25, 30 years from now will be jaded middle-aged people who will say, oh, Israel has a right to defend itself. We don't stand with Palestine. But they're young, they're idealists.
No,
They
Abhishek,
believe
but
that...
are you telling me that intimidating Jewish students and professors is freedom of expression, is a way to bring about change?
No, I'm not going to say that. Look, Shreya, there is a fine line between being anti-Israel's policies in Palestine and anti-Jewish, right? There's a difference
But
between
that line, Abhishek, has been clearly blurred at the university campuses.
I would say that there are Jewish professors, there are Jewish students who are also part of these protests, and there are also Jewish students who feel unsafe on campus. There is a fine line, I will repeat, between being anti-Semitic and opposing what Israel is doing in Palestine. I would like the government of India to take a clear stance also on the issue and say which side of the divide they're on. Are we for a ceasefire? Are we for Israel's right to defend itself? The Prime Minister has not taken a clear stance on this issue. As an Indian, that's what concerns me. And Shreya, one more point. Students are meant to protest. That is the point of being a student. The point of being a student is you're supposed to be angry. You're supposed to be against the system. In a sense, rebel without a cause. Here, these are rebels with a cause. Let us encourage protest because that is what makes good individuals, right? Protest is part of the very creed of our country. How do you think we got independence, Shreya? We didn't get independence by sitting at the negotiating table with the British. We got independence from civil disobedience. We got independence from the Dandi March. We got independence from the Quit India movement. Mahatma Gandhi led us through civil disobedience. Martin Luther King adopted it, Nelson Mandela adopted it, and today these protesters want to adopt it, well and good, but don't engage in violence. Please keep the protest peaceful. That's
okay,
what I would say.
let me ask Rashmi then. Rashmi, do you resonate with that thought that it's fine for students at the university campuses in US to protest and make their voices heard, and perhaps global leaders should listen to them with the kind of wars one after the other that we are seeing around us?
Well, Shreya, I think I've seen enough protests, and not too, late in the timeline. I've seen it very recently, but I see a sort of motivated protest and not a genuine when I see one. And the kind of timing on this is extremely wrong, and the kind of activities that they're resorting to, including making other Jewish students and teachers on campus feel unsafe. I think I do have questions about these kinds of protests. I've seen my fair share of protests on campuses. I know what a healthy protest looks like. I know what a healthy student agitation looks like. But none of these protests, which are currently spreading across Ivy Leagues and other universities in the United States, have any features or resemble a healthy protest in any way. And I think most of all, they do not look organic, which is extremely concerning because the timing is way off. This is nowhere close to when the conflict started, and the motivations are dubious. I'm afraid that students are now being made pawn in a larger political sort of, tug in the world, and that shouldn't happen because students, yes, we do have our
Abhishek
right
wants to respond to you, Rashmi. Abhishek, please go ahead.
We do have our, if I may continue.
Yeah.
We do have our,
Abhishek
voice,
wants to
but
make
then
a
we are
point,
also
Rashmi.
studying, we are within campuses. So I think we need to also respect that, and we need to make sure that we are within lines which are accepted for students. And that's not clearly happening in the United States right now.
Okay.
Shreya, look, the point is this: the White House has condemned these protests, right? The establishment has condemned these protests. If you are going to protest against the establishment, is the establishment going to decide what is a healthy protest? Is the establishment going to decide, oh, is this a motivated? Of course, it's a motivated protest. Of course, it's a motivated protest. The students there are motivated by the fact that Israel's war in Gaza, quite frankly, has gone on for far too long. I too supported Israel's right to defend itself. But for 6 months after the event, you continue to bomb Palestine. It's gone too far, and Prime Minister Modi has also called for a ceasefire. But he also calls up Netanyahu and says, we are stand with Israel's right to defend itself. We need to take a clear stand. We cannot put shackles on these students as protesters. Shreya, these students are risking a lot. International students who are part of the protests, including Indian students, Shreya, risk having their visa visas cancelled. These students have been told that they stand not ending the semester in good standing. What that basically means is you don't get a character certificate, as we call it in India, right? These students could get expelled. They might not be allowed to sit for their examinations. They might not get their degree. If they're being manipulated, so be it. They're young. The young are always manipulated. It's being done in India too, basically. But they are young. That is their right. You have a right to be manipulated. You have a right to protest. You have a right to have your voice heard. We cannot censor these students. Again, I repeat, Shreya, you cannot resort to violence. Follow the Gandhian ideal. Stick to non-violence and you will win. And you will triumph.
Rashmi, one point is also the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu back home is also facing a lot of pressure domestically to end this war. In fact, the ICC now is also mulling to take action against him and take out an arrest warrant against him. Clearly, Israel is being called out to stop the aggression that it has been perpetuating. It's now time to end the war, but clearly Prime Minister Netanyahu doesn't seem to think so.
Well, Shreya, not all the hostages which were taken initially are brought back home. So I think, until every citizen is brought back home, the Prime Minister in some way or the other does, reserve his rights to bring them back home because his responsibility is towards his citizens. But I think as Indians, we do not have to, get too much into this because when we've had our conflicts, no other countries have come to save us. So I think it's okay for us to remain diplomatic on this issue, but I do feel that as long as not every Israeli citizen is brought back home and is not freed as a hostage of the Hamas, then that right to look for them, that right to recover them, that exists until the day every Israeli is brought back home who was forcefully taken hostage by Hamas. And I think the world really needs to draw a distinction and call out the Hamas and stop calling the Hamas as, these freedom fighters, which is a word which is popularly used in every campus at this point. I think that also needs to be condemned. So I think there are issues on all sides. And, it goes without saying that, of course, millions of innocents are being caught up in this entire incident within Palestine. So it's a great, I think it's a terrible problem and it's a terrible situation. But I think everybody has their side and there are issues on either sides of the aisle.
Okay. Okay, Abhishek, please do make your point. Also, just to add to what you want to say and make a question to you. We had heads of Ivy League colleges, Harvard, MIT, all of them saying some very controversial things regarding the Israel-Hamas war, where they said they were okay and they will not stop if something on the lines of genocide happens there. But clearly, that also reflecting that academics and geopolitics is a dangerous mix, and not just the students, but the university heads, the academicians at these colleges and universities are also very, very influenced by a certain kind of political and geopolitical ideology.
Well, look, Shreya, of course, we all have an ideology, right? But the presidents of these US universities, their first, how do I put it, their first commitment or their responsibility is for the students on campus. Yes, you have to draw a balance between the right of the students to express themselves and the rights of the other students who just want to go to class, who want to learn, right? They don't want their day-to-day routine disrupted. Now, what is happening on campuses across the United States is daily life is being affected. Students are being told to avoid, certain campuses altogether. Yes, it's gone beyond just civil disobedience. It has crossed over to an extent into criminal disobedience in terms of, breaking the glass, occupying a hall. But Shreya, sometimes you have to shout to have your voice heard. Now, that's what these students are doing. Now, if you look at it in the past, US protests have always led to positive change. Student protests, I'm talking about. Berkeley was a hotbed of protests for the rights of African Americans. You saw the Vietnam War protests, apartheid. And to respond to what Rashmi said, Rashmi, the United States stood with India when we were demanding freedom from the British. The US was an ally of India. The US supported India. It's not that they didn't. What happened post-war, post-independence, of course, with the Cold War and all that, I don't want to get into it. Also, what I would like to say to Rashmi's point is I am not pro-Hamas. I'm not pro-Israel, I'm not pro-Palestine, I'm not pro-Hamas. I'm anti-war, right? The war has to end. Israel has made its point. Israel now risks, and Israel has lost the narrative. Basically, the narrative in the US has taken hold that Israel has gone too far. So those of us who are sympathizing with Israel now have no option but to call them out. You said, okay, what Hamas did, Shreya, was horrific. They killed children in their cribs. They came into Israel, right, murdered and slaughtered innocent civilians.
We cannot deny that that happened. And the Palestinian people have supported Hamas. And maybe the Palestinian people even rejoiced at what happened in Israel. But that does not justify their obliteration by the Israeli state. Benjamin Netanyahu is an extremely unpopular prime minister in Israel. He was on the outs and this incident happened. And somehow this is a desperate bid by Netanyahu to get his popularity back. Now, going back to India taking a stance, we have to take a stance if we want to be a Vishwa Guru. Prime Minister Modi has played a role in the Russia-Ukraine war. He should play the same role in the Israel-Palestine war and say, this is our stand. Are we against war? Yes, we've always supported a two-state solution in Palestine. Now, the diplomats will say we support a two-state solution, right? Then Prime Minister Modi says, I stand with Netanyahu. So we have to, if we want to just be a superpower someday, you want to be a superpower, you have to take a stand on issues like this. You have to offer moral leadership to the world, Shreya. We're not doing that.
All right, we'll leave it there. We hope that these protesters do understand that violence is not the way to move forward with their opinions to be put forward to global leaders. And we hope that global leaders are listening to demonstrators and they will be ending these wars that have been happening. Rashmi Samant and Abhishek Sudhir, thank you very much to both of you for joining us on Nation Tonight and sharing your perspectives. Thank you very much.